Hey everybody, Matt at Eastwood. We're here in the Eastwood garage doing another live tech session. If you guys haven't watched one of these before, we like it to be as interactive as possible. So I want you guys to join in, log into the chat on Facebook or YouTube, and you can ask questions. So we have Scott over here, our lead tech advisor.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. If you guys have any questions, make sure you hit me up, Facebook, YouTube. I'll be able to answer you live right then and there, or I can always shoot them over to Matt. So feel free to ask anything. Obviously today's TIG welding, but you know, if you got questions on other stuff, hit me up. But today we're going to get over to some different uses for the TIG welder.
Thanks, Scott. So today I use the TIG welder. I find myself, the more I get proficient with the TIG welder, I start finding different uses for it and using it in place of some other tools that I may have previously had to put the TIG welder away, grabbed another tool to use it. So I wanted to show a few of those uses and also tell you about a couple others. Maybe it'll help you when you're working on a project that you might be able to use the TIG welder for something different. So the welder, just before we quick jump in, I'm using today is our TIG 200 Digital. This thing is a newer welder we've come out with, but it has quickly become my favorite welder. TIG 200 Digital, I'll swing to the front here, has of course a digital readout on it. Ooh. Aside from having blinky gauges, it has a bunch of cool functions on it that lets you really control the weld. We've done a handful of videos on that so far, so I'm not going to get real in depth in that, but I'm just going to show you some different functions. So the first thing I'm going to show you guys is doing a spot weld. So generally I use a MIG welder for doing spot welds for most of my life. Once I got the TIG 200 Digital, this has a cool little spot weld function on it here that makes it really handy. So you can dial in the machine and set up so you can do a spot weld. So I'm going to show you guys how to do a quick spot weld without drilling any holes on sheet metal using the TIG welder. So I set a preset in here, so I'm going to jump into the recall, and I think I set it at number 15 if my memory is correct here. So I'm going to hit enter, and we can hit enter again just to make sure I'm in the right one here. So this weld setup here is now at this ramp up area is actually shows a seconds. So we have 2.3 seconds. It's going to ramp up to 100 amps, and then it's going to immediately drop down and just do a post flow. So this takes away all the ramp up, the ramp down features on that. So I'm going to show you guys doing a quick couple spot welds, how quick you can do those, and then we'll show you the piece when we're done here. So get my gloves, my helmet on, all that good stuff. I'm using the pedal today because we're doing a couple different things. So no filler rod, all we're doing is fusion welding it together. This is about as close as it gets to a true spot weld, a true resistance spot weld. So I'm using our spot weld pliers here, that little copper backer on them, just to make my life a little easier because I'm just working on a little test piece here. So I'm going to hold my TIG welder at the torch at about the same height I would normally and hit the pedal all the way down. It's going to weld and then stop automatically, and I can let off my pedal. And I'm going to do another one real quick here, and then we'll show you the results. Of course, if your panel's already clamped, you may not need these pliers, but for me, doing this here, it's a little quicker and easier. All right, so we'll show the close-ups here. There's a couple I did when I was dialing it in. These are the two I just did. So those two there, the resistance, or with the TIG welder only, no filler rod. I'm gonna check the back side here. We got great penetration. Now using that copper backer kind of stops it from blowing through it all also, which is nice. And then we can take our two pieces here. I can bend it, open it up. And you can see it's fully welded. And the key thing, I'll bend that back together, is just look how small those spot welds are. They're really, really small. There's no splatter, there's no grinding, and I'm able to do a nice small spot weld without drilling holes or anything, and that's just below flush right there would be pretty much identical to a resistance spot weld you would see. So if you're doing a true restoration where you're trying to mimic it as close as you can and you don't have a big resistance spot welder, this is the ticket right here. This doesn't get any better than that. So you can do this with a normal, if you have a TIG welder that doesn't have a spot function, you can do that. It just takes a little bit of practice with the pedal to ease in, get it just right, and then let out. So again, like I always say, if you practice on a test piece that's the same thickness, you can dial it in and do that. But that's a cool little function because the way the TIG welder function works, it's not going to leave any type of splatter or anything you have to grind. The other thing we offer, if you want to get if you want all your spot welds to be pretty much identical and get the repeatability, we offer a spot weld nozzle for the TIG welder. So I have I had a gas leads on here. That's what I use normally with the welder, but this is our spot weld nozzle. So it has little standoffs here, so you can turn it like that. So you can get your TIG torch and have the perfect standoff. So this is good for any of you guys who maybe have your hand isn't quite as steady, or you just want that repeatability where you can just get it the same distance every time. You can really dial the machine in, so you could swap one of these out. So this is really handy to have on the cart, and you just thread it on really quick. It fits any torch that's a similar size, 17, 19. They're all pretty close, and this should fit it. And it will fit any of our TIG welders as well. So that's the first one. The next couple of things I'm going to talk about are where I found myself using a TIG welder in place of using an oxyacetylene torch. I mean, there is sometimes no replacement for using an oxyacetylene torch, but there is times where it's just a pain for me to pull it out, or most recently, I ran out of acetylene and I'm out of luck till Monday. So what did I have to do? I had to go and use my TIG torch, was the next closest thing. So one thing to do is heat shrinking with a TIG torch. So normally, if you guys aren't familiar with it, if you use heat shrinking with an oxyacetylene torch, you're going to get your torch right directly over top. We imagine this is our oxy torch, right directly over top with the flame, and we're going to watch the metal. And when it gets just about red, or just gets red, you're going to pull it out, and you're going to let some people quench it, some people just let it cool naturally. But that's going to actually heat shrink. It's going to heat it up, and then everything's going to contract, and you can either pull out oil canning in a panel, or if you have something that has a little bit too much crown in a panel, you can heat shrink and bring that down a little bit. So I'm going to show you guys how to do it here with a TIG torch. Same kind of process. And let me just change my function here. And I'm just going to go here to our setting, our preset number 1, which is 10 amp start, goes up to 80, has no ramp down. It goes right to 0 amps, and then we have 5 seconds of post flow. So I know that that one's really close to what I need. I'm going to use the pedal to adjust it because I don't quite need 80 amps. So what I'm going to be doing is looking for when it just barely starts to get red, I'm going to heat it up to that point, and then I'm going to pull back out again. So actually, I'll show you with the camera before I get too crazy. So this is a panel we used when we did a planishing hammer video. I saved this piece here. Ton of crown in this panel. So we raised this up considerably here. So I'm going to show you guys, I'm going to do a handful of heat shrinks in an area around here real quick, and then we'll come back with the straight edge and show you guys the change that it made in it. So pull this over here. And if you have any questions, don't forget to shoot them over to Scott, and we'll take some questions then. All right, so keep a pretty tight distance. Again, no filler rod. Any heat, come and then back out. Do one more. So I'm not using the full 80 amps, I'm just using enough to see a puddle just about start, and then I'm letting off right away. So you can see the spots here. Now the reason I like doing it with a TIG torch, there is times where oxyacetylene is a little better suited, but sometimes I like using a TIG torch because, again, we're not heating up a giant area, so you can really pinpoint. If we're trying to bring this whole crown down, that might be a different story. We might heat it up with a torch, it'd be a little better. But if we just have, say, just a little bit too much peak here and we want to take it out, we can work in just these areas and sink it down. We're shrinking the metal. So let's show you guys. Before, we had a heavy crown here, and you can see now I got a little bit of a flat spot right in this area here. If I move it to here, see we're barely touching, even in between here. See how it's barely touching, a very small area. And then this area where I've heat shrunk, where we've got, I don't know, 1.5 inches or so that's now flat, where we flattened it out in the center there. So I've heat shrunk here, and again, in between, it's still got that peak in it, but right here we flattened it out. So you can really, really get precise with your heat shrinks, which with an oxyacetylene torch might be a little bit more difficult to do. Some of the guys have been doing it for a really long time, might be better at it, but it's probably tough to see. There we go. You guys could probably kind of see how we got flat spots in the metal, trying to read it off the light there, where it's flattened out just in those areas. So those areas we brought the crown down. So this is really good for this, or if you guys have, say, a trunk lid or a deck lid skin that has an oil can in it or something, any part that has an oil can in it, and you know that you have too much material there and you're trying to heat shrink it to pull the panel tight again, you can do some heat shrinks with your TIG torch and pull it tight, and it works really well. So that's a cool way to do it. You don't have to pull out your oxyacetylene torches, and for me it's a little more controlled. I'm just more comfortable with the TIG. Sometimes I find myself reaching for that instead, which works well. So any questions that we have so far?
We're good right now.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Well, if you guys have questions, make sure you drop them to Scott. Please say hello to Scott. Don't make him feel lonely. So I'm going to just, now the next thing we're going to show you is really using it like an oxyacetylene torch. So I got a piece of 3/8 flat bar here in the vise. And say you want to bend this and put a bend in it. We can do the same type of thing as you would with an oxyacetylene torch. So I'm going to crank this up pretty high just so I have the power if I need it. I'm probably not going to use all of it. So 175 amps there. And make sure we're set. Oop. And we're going to move over here. So if you need to bend something, I do this quite often, especially if I'm making a bracket or I'm just making something using round bar, flat bar, and I, again, don't feel like getting the torches out, or I don't want to. You can use a TIG torch if you work the pedal right, and you can heat this all around just like you would using an oxyacetylene, and we can actually heat this up cherry red and bend it down. I got something pretty sizable just so you guys could show, because I'm sure if I grab something thin, somebody's going to call BS and tell me, oh, I can just bend that anyway. So this is 3/8 bar. I mean, I could probably bend this in the vise, but I'd probably pull the table over. But if we want to put a bend in this, I'm going to heat it up. Now it's going to take a little bit longer, of course, because it's thick, but the same would happen with your oxy torch. So I'm going to start on this side, and then I'll probably have to work around. Actually, give me one. Another thing I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to actually grind a little flat in this on the sander. Sorry, guys. Because I want a wider cone here to make it work a little quicker. So So what I did is I put a flat in on the, I put a pretty heavy flat on the tungsten here so that I'm not getting such a fine point. I had it ground to a real fine point because we were doing spot welds and the heat shrinks where I wanted them really small. So I had almost a sharp pencil point on it. So I got a little flat on this. So you guys can, basically I want a bigger cone. So much like you would change the tip on your oxy torch, you can you can grind your tungsten a little differently. Now we'll have more of a wider, the end of the cone of your arc is going to be a little bit wider here. So put my gloves on, and I'll be heating. This might take a few, I don't know. Never know. All right. So I'm going to start up here a little higher than the vise because the vise would heat soak. So what I'm going to do is, we don't necessarily want to gouge the metal real far because we can gouge the metal. We kind of want to heat it. So I'm moving it around as I see it kind of start a puddle. I start moving it. Basically just letting it heat soak, Almost need a crowd to shout to me when it's red hot. So again, I'm just putting some heat into it. I got a nice wide cone on there, so I'm just heating. I'm trying not to gouge into the metal too much, just we don't want to cut down the thickness. We're just trying to put some heat into it. It's starting, I can feel it. So you can see I did that with one hand, with the TIG torch still going. You're not going to do that with it, with it being cold. So we got a nice bend in it, nice tight radius. That's one of the keys here is because I'm bending it above where the vise is clamped, we don't have anything to bend off of. So you can tell I got a really nice tight 90 on this because we were heating such a nice fine area with the TIG torch. We weren't heating up as big of a giant area. I was really putting the heat in the center area. So we're able to fold this thing over on itself and get a real nice tight 90 on the part. It's pretty nice. I mean, this isn't thin stuff here. So, I mean, you can do that. It helps to have a helper, because you can go around and have them bending a little bit, but you can see we got I'll turn it, maybe you can, like that. So you can see the radius we got on it, which is pretty cool. And then on the inside, it's not eating away a little bit. We have a little bit of where it was starting to bubble a little bit as I bent it down, trying to hold it with one hand and the torch the other, but I mean, we didn't eat away, we didn't reduce the thickness of the metal, which is key. But yeah, we got a nice 90 bent on that piece there. Now you can take this same idea and put this to if you need to burn out a bolt, or if you have a nut that's stuck on a bolt. If you're pretty accurate, you can use the TIG torch and melt away to burn it off it's all in getting comfortable with the pedal and learning how to just feel where you can ease into the pedal and you can give it the heat you want. On this particular piece, I didn't want to actually melt too much material. I just wanted to put a ton of heat into it. So I kept my torch a little further away than I normally would, and I just watched it, and as soon as a puddle started to form, I kind of worked back and forth, keeping it from gouging into the metal too much. But if you give it enough pedal, we could have eaten right into that, or you could burn out a bolt that's broken off or something like that. I've used it to do most recently, I broke a tap, being an idiot trying to go too fast, and I broke a tap off inside a hole, and I was pretty much screwed because it was in a piece of box tubing. So I took my TIG torch, put it right down in there, and melted it and kind of blew everything through there. I didn't want to use a plasma cutter because it was kind of an area where I didn't want to throw a ton of sparks. So you can use this concept to use a much like an oxyacetylene torch with, you know, just kind of expanding your mind a little bit of what you can do. So that's a couple of my little tips I have. Hopefully it's a jumping point for you guys. If you have any other questions that you got along the way?
Yeah, I got a good one for you here that Troy wants to know. What's the maximum thickness that you would say you've done or would feel safe doing with that little trick you just did for bending the metal?
I mean, that's 3/8. You can kind of go, I mean, within reason, of course, as thick as you want. What ends up happening, the big limitation that you have, is the heat that starts getting put off. With a TIG torch, your hand is generally a little closer to the hot zone than when you're using an oxyacetylene torch. So usually my hand starts getting hot, like even on that towards the end I was starting to feel a little bit of heat, but I have thinner gloves on. Or if you don't have a water-cooled torch, if you have an air-cooled torch like this, if we sit there at 200 amps for 5 minutes, the torch is gonna start to not get happy. So you could kind of go as thick as you want. It's all in just the heat is really the biggest issue. The other thing is having a helper is a big thing. I probably couldn't go much thicker than that because I really needed to go to the back side if it was any thicker than that to heat both sides of it to get it to really get a full cherry red to bend it. So that's the other thing. If you have a helper, they can be bending on a little bit. You can heat it and then go to the other side and bounce back and forth. But I mean, really, it's all just like anything, the heat and the time it takes. But you can bend some really thick stuff with it. It's just when you start getting if you got the 1 inch or something like that thick, probably your hands or the torch would get really hot first. But that's some thick stuff. You could go a little thicker if you take your time. So that was a good question. So I think that's it, right?
Yep,
is that all you got? Cool. So thanks, guys, for watching. Hopefully this is something a little different that using a TIG welder that you guys never knew. If you have any questions or any ideas for future broadcasts, make sure you drop us a line in the comments. As always, we do videos Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. We're always doing tech videos for you guys. So make sure you just check us out around 3. And you can always watch these recorded on our Eastwood YouTube channel, username Eastwood Co. So thanks, guys, for watching. I'll catch you next week.